Our next presenter is Mr. Peter Ferrara, one of the top experts in the world on Social Security reform and also on controlling the national debt. He will discuss Social Security optionality, reducing the wealth gap. His paper on controlling the deficit, which he will not have time to discuss today, can be found on the initiative website. Mr. Ferrara.
Thank you, Professor Moore. Thank you for all being here today. The latest annual report of the Social Security Board of Trustees warns that Social Security will run out of funds to pay promised benefits by 2034, and quite possibly as soon as 2028. So this is not some remote possibility now in the next century, like we've talked about this in the past. This is now 13 years away, where the program will be unable to pay promised benefits. That includes, for some people who are senior citizens and retired today, will be expecting to receive those benefits. In fact, the U.S. government actuaries now project that the disability insurance of Social Security will run short of funds to pay promised benefits by next year. So the disability insurance portion of the program is going to be bankrupt next year. Now, the fundamental issue and problem with Social Security is that there's no savings and investment anywhere in the Social Security system. It is entirely a tax and redistribution system. Social Security is all about taxing the people over here and sending the checks to the people over there. There's no investment made anywhere in the system at all, and that affects all the problems of the program. Even when the system was running annual surpluses, like it was from 1980 to about 2010, close to 90% of the money coming in was paid out within the year to pay current benefits. So even when it had annual surpluses, 90% of the money coming in was still going out within less than a year. And even the surpluses themselves were not saved. They were lent to the federal government. They were given to the federal government in return for IOUs, which said it was turned over to the federal government. The federal government spent it on general budget expenses, everything from foreign aid to bridges to nowhere. And Social Security received back an IOU, saying, okay, when you need the money to pay benefits, give us a call, we'll pay it back. So those IOUs are entirely what's in the Social Security Trust Fund. There's no savings and investment anywhere in the Social Security Trust Fund. They're all just claims from the federal government. They are a statement. What they are is a statement of the legal authority of Social Security to draw money from general revenues in addition to the money it gets from payroll tax revenues. Social Security is financed, of course, primarily, overwhelmingly by payroll tax revenues. But all the Social Security Trust Funds mean as a legal matter is they are a statement of the legal authority that Social Security has to draw from general revenues in addition to payroll tax revenues. So this is why Social Security first of all, this is why Social Security is vulnerable to these financial problems, because there's no store of real savings and investment anywhere. When you have a traditional retirement plan, the money is saved and invested, held in some sort of trust fund, and they use all the language of traditional retirement plans. They use the language trust fund, et cetera, but they don't have any of the reality of a traditional retirement plan. So they are just a tax and redistribution program. And so now, what is fascinating is to go through all the implications of what would happen if. Well, let me finish with this data here, or let me go on to this data about the financial crisis. Under so-called intermediate assumptions, the current total Social Security payroll tax rate of 12.4% today will have to jump in 2035 by close to 40%. So under intermediate assumptions, when Social Security runs out the money to pay promised benefits by somewhere between by 2034, it's going to require an immediate 40% increase in taxes in order to continue to pay all the promised benefits. That's under what they call intermediate assumptions. Under so-called pessimistic assumptions, which could be actually more realistic, payroll taxes, the program will run short of funds to pay promised benefits by 2028 and will require an immediate 60% increase in payroll taxes in order to pay all promised benefits. When you have payroll taxes in these ranges, payroll tax increases in these ranges is going to cause soaring unemployment, because the payroll tax is a tax on employment, and when you raise the tax on employment, you're going to get less of it. And so there'll be less hiring, less job creation, and higher unemployment. Now, suppose what is fascinating is think through all the implications of, suppose we actually had real savings and investment on the money paid into Social Security. Suppose that they operated like a real retirement system, and the money was actually saved and invested over your entire lives. What are the implications of that? Well, for one thing, there would be no unfunded liabilities to Social Security at all. All the unfunded liabilities arise from the fact that it's a tax and redistribution system, or the more formal term is pay-as-you-go system. And so this is why it has $25 trillion of unfunded liabilities, because it's based on the whole idea behind the program is not that your money is going to be saved and invested for your retirement, but that when you reach retirement, they're going to tax working people then to pay your benefits. And so they're promising to tax future workers when you reach retirement. And so there's no real cash to back up your retirement. There's no savings and investment anywhere in the system. So that's the fundamental shortcoming of the program. Now, so because this is no savings and investment anywhere in the program does not earn annual investment returns on the money paid into the program. It's just a matter of they promise to just accelerate this redistribution at a faster and faster pace, so that they can pay you some kind of modest increase in your benefits over and above the taxes that are paid into the system. But if you calculate the actual value of these promised benefits, even if all the promised benefits were somehow paid. Now, the actuaries say under current law they can't pay all the promised benefits. But let's put that aside now and say, okay, let's assume all the promised benefits could be paid. What are those benefits worth? I mean, what kind of rate of return are you getting on what you and your employer are paying to the system? For most working people today, even if Social Security could pay all of its promised benefits, those benefits would represent a real rate of return of less than 1% on the Social Security taxes paid throughout their working years. So this is what the Social Security system basically promises, is a real rate of return of 1% or less. For many people, it's actually a negative real rate of return. If you take the actual value of all the benefits that are promised and do an actuarial analysis, what are these benefits worth, and compare those to the value of what you're paying in, it's less than 1% for most people. For some people, it's actually a negative real rate of return. What does that mean in practical terms? A negative real rate of return is like taking your money and depositing it in the bank. And instead of the bank paying you interest on your money, on your deposit, you're paying the bank interest on the money to hold it for you. And so that's what a negative real rate of return is. And that's what it is actually for millions of Americans today come under that framework, because the system is a worse deal. The younger you are, it's a worse deal the more money you earn. And so many people actually end up in a negative real rate of return. A key factor is that's where the system is going for everybody in the future. If it's going to reach the point where it's a negative real rate of return for everybody, because whatever the government does to eliminate these long-term deficits, whether it increases taxes or lowers benefits, it makes the rate of return worse. So eventually you're going to be in a situation where everybody's getting a negative real rate of return out of Social Security. Now let's compare this to what kind of returns people can get in the marketplace on this savings and investment if they had a savings and investment system. What are all the implications of this? The first major implication of if you change to a savings and investment system is that you'd have higher benefits for all workers, all family combinations today. Rich or poor, single or married, with children or without children, everybody would get a better deal. That's because the fundamental truism is a lifetime of savings and investment will always give you higher benefits and better returns than a lifetime of no savings and investment, which is all that Social Security amounts to. So the authoritative data on investment in stocks, for example, Jeremy Siegel had his definitive book, Stocks for the Long Run, and he documents that the real annual compound rate of return on corporate stocks in the United States over the 200-year period from 1802 to 2001 was 6.9% after inflation. So while you get a 1% or less real rate of return on Social Security on average, a diversified stock portfolio over 200 years of U.S. history has been virtually 7% real rate of return. So if you compound 7% real rate of return over a lifetime of savings and investment and compare it to a 1% real rate of return over a lifetime of savings and investment, the 7% accumulates to an enormous difference. So when they asked Albert Einstein, who was the founder of atomic energy, the nuclear bomb, what is the most powerful force in the universe, he said compound interest. And so if you have, that's what a lifetime of savings investment has working in your favor, is compound interest. And so, for example, well, let me just give you a little bit more data here, first of all. So, I mean, the long-term real rate of return on corporate bonds in the United States has been 4%. And Harvard professor Martin Feldstein, the former chairman of the National Bureau of Economic Research, and his associate Andrew Samwick calculated in 1997 a portfolio of 60% stocks and 40% bonds would have generated a real rate of return of 5.5% over the 50-year period, 1947 to 1997. And then if you take the data all the way back to 1996, you still have the same 5.5% real rate of return. So even if you look at the 5.5% real rate of return, here's the bottom line. You take a two-earner middle-income couple, investing over their lifetime in their own personal savings and investment account, what would otherwise be paid by them and their employers into Social Security, they would reach retirement with $1,223,000 in today's dollars after adjusting for inflation. And that fund would be able to pay them, out of the continuing investment returns alone, about twice what Social Security promises, but cannot pay, about twice what Social Security promises under current law, while still allowing them to hold on to the $1.2 million and leave that to their children. Because you've got this accumulated fund, and it generates investment returns every year. The investment returns, once you accumulate that over a lifetime, are twice what Social Security even promises you, let alone what you could pay. And you can still leave the $1.2 million to your children. Or you can cash the whole $1.2 million in to get the maximum benefits you can get over the remainder of your life. And it's more like 4 times what Social Security promises. So this was a two-earner middle-income couple. The man earned the average income for males his entire life. The woman earned the average income for women. His wife earned the average income for women over her entire life. And so middle-class couples here can retire as millionaires if they were free to actually save and invest what they're required to pay into a tax and redistribution system. So what's significant about this then, if you had a savings and investment system, you would not have these short-term financial crises. Those crises would be eliminated. And then you would have, you are transforming the payroll tax, which for most working people is the largest tax most of them would pay, into a personal family wealth engine, accumulating substantial funds. So under these personal accounts, you would not have lower benefits to solve the problems of Social Security. You would have higher benefits. And you would not have a later retirement age imposed on you by the government. You choose your own retirement age. And so I worked with Congressman Paul Ryan 10 years ago to introduce a bill providing for personal accounts for Social Security. It was called by the Washington Post the ideal personal account for Social Security plan. And he had it scored. That thing was scored by the chief actuary of Social Security. And the chief actuary of Social Security, this score is still on the Social Security Administration website. If you go to ssa.gov, Office of the Actuary, they have a category for solvency memoranda, and you can find the memorandums he wrote for the bills that Paul Ryan wrote and introduced 2004, 2005, which I worked closely with him, hand in glove, to develop those. And he says on those memos that these personal accounts would eliminate the deficits of Social Security entirely with no benefit increases, no benefit cuts, and no tax increases. It's because you are shifting the responsibility, so much of the responsibility for paying those future benefits from taxpayers to savings and investment, so that the deficits are thereby eliminated. So you would eliminate the deficits entirely. He also said in the solvency memorandum that the personal accounts were so obviously a better deal for working people that he assumed in his analysis that 100% of workers chose the personal accounts. Now, so that was borne out. That is borne out by the real-world examples of this. One of the interesting things about these personal accounts is that it's been tried now in so many places around the world. So the very first one was the South American nation of Chile in 1981, and then all these promises were borne out in the South American nation of Chile. The new system in the personal accounts required half the the payments of the old pay-as-you-go taxes, the taxes in the old pay-as-you-go system, but it actually has paid at least twice the benefits of the old system, for example. And then there were similar real-world examples. There have been in the United States. In 1981, at that time, they still from the original program, allowed state and local government workers to choose to opt out of Social Security into their own private system. The last group to do this was the workers in and around Galveston, Texas, 3 counties, and they adopted a system very much like in Chile, and they had the same results. They paid less than the old system than they had to pay in the Social Security, and they got much higher benefits because they were generating returns from the real capital investment. And so they had these same real-world results as was estimated by the chief actuary of Social Security. Another implication of this is how powerfully it addresses the inequality issue. So the chief actuary of Social Security actually estimated for Paul Ryan's legislation how much money would be accumulated by working people all across the country. And the numbers he came up with was after 15 years, after just the first 15 years of these personal accounts for Social Security, you would have $7.8 trillion held in the accounts of working people all across the country. $7.8 trillion in the accounts of working people. After 25 years, you'd have $16 trillion in these accounts. So this does far more to address the inequality issue than everything that Elizabeth Warren and Hillary Clinton have dreamed up together their entire lives. There's nothing that Bernie Sanders has ever talked about that would have any kind of impact like this in really reducing wealth inequality in America. And it comes about not just from redistribution, taking from these people who have money and giving it to those people who have less. That's counterproductive and anti-economics. It comes about through the creation of vast realms of new wealth more equally owned. I hate to use the word distributed because it's not actually distributed. You go out and earn and produce the wealth. That it doesn't there's nobody who's handing out the wealth here at the wealth wagon. You people actually produce and create their own wealth. But the thing is, the reform would create the opportunity for vast new realms of newly created wealth more equally owned. And so the net impact on the concentration of wealth in America would be to reduce it by 50% based on calculations by Martin Feldstein. At the same time, it has an immediate economic effect as well, because when you have all that savings and investment going into the capital, in today's economy, it's a big boom to the current economic system. So it's a big boost to economic growth. It's the foundation for the creation of new jobs. All comes from savings and investment. That's what allows new businesses to be created, what allows businesses to expand, what allows the hiring of more workers, what creates the capital investment that enables workers to be more productive, which generates the income to the business to pay the workers more. That's where increased wages come from, is capital investment. So this would have an immediate gain to working people from the beginning. It's not just a matter of getting better benefits when you retire. From the beginning today, it's going to be a boost to increased jobs and higher wages, increased demand for labor, which raises wages. And so it's immediate benefit for working people today. So that's basically all the implications from this. Is that it's powerfully pro-growth, and it actually solves the problem of Social Security without cutting benefits or raising taxes, but in fact enabling people to generate higher incomes in retirement and better benefits. And so it's a populist, positive, pro-growth, win-win entitlement reform. And it's an opportunity. It's a fundamental component of any program to increase economic growth and prosperity equally shared by everybody. So there's a summary of that's my paper. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Mr. Ferrara? If not, yes.
Yeah, Under this new system, would people be allowed to take money out and spend it for something else? Let's say somebody was not responsible, had a drug habit, wanted to spend their money on drugs or something like that, and then figured, when I get to be 65, they'll have a welfare program that will cover my expenses. Is there any
No,
protection?
no, they can't. You can't take it out for anything else. But it is an individual choice. You don't have to take the personal accounts. It's up to each person individually, and that's what it was like in Chile, and that's what it's proposed for the United States. That's what it was under Paul Ryan's bill, for example. Paul Ryan's bill eventually grew into what's called the Ryan Roadmap because he applied the same principles to entitlement programs across the board. And I have a short book I recently published on this. I gave it to somebody here a minute ago, but I was going to show it to you. But it's Power to the People, the new road to freedom and prosperity for the poor, seniors, seniors, and those most in need of the world's best health care. Because it talks about how to reform all entitlement programs under this theme of positive, populist, pro-growth, win-win entitlement reform. And they're all similar to this kind of reform, where you solve the problems of the entitlement program, but you do it in a positive, populist way so that seniors get a better deal, the poor get a better deal, people who are sick get access to better health care than they can get today under Medicaid, Medicare, and Obamacare. So that book you can get at heartland.org. I recommend that to you. But again, it's an individual choice. You don't have to do it if you don't want to. But when they allowed people a choice, like in Chile, the Minister of Labor in Chile described the situation as people went to the personal accounts faster than East Germans fleeing East Germany after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And that validated what the chief actuary estimated, is that if we did this in America, he said 100%, he's going to calculate it on assumptions that 100% of working people are going to choose it because it's obviously a better deal. But it is your individual choice. So if you trust the government more and you want to be dependent on the government instead, you're free to do that.
Mr. Ferrara, building on that question, I believe you could also build in a number of guarantees and protections in the system as well. For example, you could put a minimum federal guarantee into the system, I gather, in the way it would be set up, and still, because your rate of return is going to be so much higher, you could also have certain limitations to protect, as would be normal in retirement accounts such as TIA-CREF, for example, and the kinds of things you could invest in, so that you would have the normal protections to avoid the kind of problem that the questioner had raised.
Yeah, well, I mean, in Paul Ryan's bill, we guaranteed that you would get at least what was promised by Social Security. Because I've written voluminous books for the Cato Institute, and I made the case that using all this data I was citing about what you can get in a long-term investment return system, that you would get much better benefits, much higher benefits through saving and investing in the private system. So if I truly believe that, let's just put in a guarantee saying, okay, look, if you choose this option, nobody can get less than what's promised by Social Security today. Because a lifetime of investment in Social Security is going to amount to 3, 4, 5 times what Social Security even promises, let alone what it can pay. So if I truly believe that, let's just guarantee that we'll pay, no matter what, at least what Social Security promises. They've had something similar in Chile since the beginning. And I'm told by the former Minister of Labor there that they've never had a situation where someone reached retirement after a lifetime of savings and investment and weren't able to get at least as much as was promised by the old system. So that means the safety net's function of Social Security is preserved in this new system.
One other question.
Yes.
FDR had a crisis. He decided to solve it by giving people money to be paid by future generations. In other words, the original recipients did not make any deposits before they started getting money back. Right now, as you say, we're in a situation where there's no money there. I'm on Social Security. I get Social Security because my son gets taxed and his class. Under your system, you're going to start this new system, but the people receiving it are still going to have to pay in to pay off the old timers. Is that right? Are they going to be paying double, or is it going to be, what are their contributions going to be?
Well, so that's the transition issue, and that's. So the approach I advocate to deal with that, and it's in the paper, is what Paul Ryan ended up doing in the Ryan Roadmap, which is he reformed all of the other entitlement programs and used the savings from those reforms to finance the transition. And so that is the most powerful pro-growth way to finance this, is if you're reducing the burden of federal spending through positive populist reforms and then using that to finance a surge in savings and investment. And that's all new savings and investment going into the economy, so it's very powerfully pro-growth altogether. Now, Professor Moore is an acolyte of doing it the way Milton Friedman would do it. Milton Friedman said, the unfunded liability of Social Security, we already owe that. It's really already part of the national debt. So just issue bonds recognizing that we owe that money and let people then save for the future. And you pay that pay those benefits out of general tax revenues, and so that's a perfectly valid approach because you're saving the money, saving and investing the money, and then it's not a net drain on private investment to recognize that you owe this money because you do already owe it. And so this was Milton Friedman's approach to Social Security reform, is just recognize the unfunded liabilities, issue bonds to promise to pay it, and just pay those out of general revenues in the future.
As Mr. Ferrara knows, excuse me for taking some of your time here, the reason I have supported having the payment on the transition costs done from issuing bonds are several things. One is you don't get caught up in the difficulty of all of the rest of entitlement reforms. It's taken as a one-off item of Social Security reform, the optionality to make the transition for those that would like to do so. The second point is that we're in this extraordinary era now in which we can issue long-term bonds, we could even issue 50-year bonds at extremely low rates that are much lower than the actual benefit that the nation will achieve from making the transfer. So there are a number of ways of doing this out of just general revenues, or out of other entitlement reforms, or out of simply issuing bonds. The point is all of them are win-win for the United States of America.
So you have Steve Moore from Heritage. He is a big advocate of doing precisely what Professor Moore says. He says we can borrow money very cheaply right now, and so we should just do the whole transition by borrowing. The fundamental point to understand is the current system, there's no savings and investment at all. You're shifting to a savings and investment system. We have to keep paying the benefits to people who have been promised, that are promised today. And so what this whole transition involves is you're shifting from a pay-as-you-go system where there's no savings and investment made to a savings and investment system in which you're actually saving and investing the money. The transition of doing that is you have to save and invest the money. And you have to do that with any savings and investment system. You have to save and invest the money. So, they actually, in the South American nation of Chile, when they did this, they actually did it through a combination. About half of it, they tell me, was financed by reducing other government spending, and about half of it was financed by borrowing some of the increased savings and investment back. So there's a lot of different ways you can do it, and they have, this again is something has been done in the real world to great success in many countries.
Ferrara,
All right,
thank you very much.